good afternoon and good evening, everybody. It's fun to see everybody logging where they're from. We've got some pretty good representation from around the world. That's fantastic. So as Maitreyi mentioned, I am a director at Parsons. I lead a team of, well, technically I manage 2 managers who manage teams of about 15 engineers across a collection of projects and programs. And all of the projects and programs that I'm the director over feature multiple cloud environments, either AWS or Azure or on-prem private clouds. And they feature technologies like DevSecOps and chaos engineering and some of the other fun things that were listed in the stuff you can ask me about. My journey started as a software engineer about 15 years ago. And I worked as a software engineer for 12 years before I decided I wanted to do anything more than that. And since then, I have, moved forward in my career and changed directions a little bit to where I am now. I still manage to stay technical, which is really, really good because that's important to me. But, that's only part of my day now. There's other pieces of it as well that are a different challenge. That's a lot of fun as well. So that's me.
Thank you, Jenn. So let's start with your journey, about your technical journey. So we are interested to know how did you start your career as a software engineer?
So I actually went to undergraduate for electrical engineering, and then I did a senior design project that was entirely hardware based. And I found that I really did not enjoy it. And I'll go further than that. Not only did I not enjoy it, I despised it. I almost didn't complete it because it was just not something I enjoyed at all. So I decided in my senior year of undergraduate that I was going to go into software engineering. Thankfully, the electrical engineering program had some coding sessions. And so I already knew how to code in C and C++, which were the main languages in use at the time. So I just dated myself, but I was able to get a job with Lockheed Martin as a software engineer writing C+ code. And I worked for Lockheed Martin for nearly a decade as a software engineer. And while I was there, I learned to write in Java and in Python as well. So I was expanding my capabilities. Then I actually stepped entirely out of the industry for 7 years and focused on being a full-time mom to my 2 daughters, who are now 13 and 15. And once they became old enough to where they were in school full-time, I came back into the work industry as a Java developer. And then that was with Parsons. And I've been with them now for almost 7 years and have progressed here from being Java developer to a cloud engineer to a DevSecOps engineer, built up my capabilities in chaos engineering along the way. And then, made my transition into the management side of things and the project management side of things.
That's really amazing, Jennifer. So talking about chaos engineering, so did you start it with intentionally, or was it like a really needed technology at that time when you started?
We did start with it intentionally. It was for the program that we started with chaos engineering on, and that I initially learned about it for, was a proof of concept type of program where we were essentially moving an existing old software system from an on-premise environment into AWS. And one of the assertions that we made as we were moving it was that it would improve its performance, it would reduce the cost of maintenance on it, and that it would be, much more resilient and fault tolerant than it was before. So we needed a way to prove those assertions, and chaos engineering fit that bill really well. The whole point of chaos engineering is to introduce failure into your system, to find those single points of failure, to find those unexpected, trickle down effects of failure, and to make sure that your system is resilient and hardened against those types of occurrences in the real world.
That's good to know, Jenn. Yes, so we have 2 questions in Q&A session. Q&A option. What made you want to change to a managerial role? We have that question. So can you please answer, Jenn?
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. If you had asked me about 5 years ago if I would ever step into the type of role I'm in now, I would have said absolutely not. I didn't think that I would take this path. What got me interested in changing into this type of a role is actually the influence that I'm able to have within my company on our culture and on the environment that we provide for our developers and our engineers. One of the things that I've learned is across industry, if you're not actively pushing for change and growth within your organization stagnates. And I was seeing that beginning to happen within parts of our company, and I wanted to prevent that as much as I could. And the way that I got the voice to do that was by stepping into a management type of role. The benefit of it is we are, improving culture and pushing culture forward all across the company. And it's making the environment better for me and for all of my people that I manage as well by doing so. And it lets us drive that change and shape our work and our organization to be the way that we want it to be, which is a pretty awesome thing.
Yes. Also, we are really curious about like how do you deal with multi-cloud architecture? Like, is that because of acquisitions and companies growing over time?
There's a variety of different reasons that we've had to pull in multi-cloud capabilities within our company. One of them is some of the customers that we oftentimes do work for were driving that way, and that was partly because they'd been burned by cost with single cloud providers, where their designs weren't effective and ended up costing them a lot more than they expected. And they realized how hard it was to move away from a single cloud into other clouds if they weren't designing for it to be multi-cloud or cloud agnostic from the beginning. So that was part of the driver. The other part of the driver was acquisitions. My company is growing, and one of the ways we are growing is through acquisition. And some of the companies that we brought in are Azure shops. So our part of the company did a lot with AWS, other parts did a lot with Azure. And we have some pockets within our company that also work with Google Cloud. So it became necessary to skill up on all of the major cloud providers so that we could really see the benefits of it. One of the things that we try to do that I'm really proud of here is we actively work to use true multi-cloud technology. And what I mean by that is we design our systems to be cloud agnostic as much as possible, but there are some places where Azure is clearly better than Google or AWS in what they offer. There's some places where AWS is clearly better, where their capability is more advanced. And when we're designing our systems, we pull in those more advanced areas for those specific cloud providers and integrate that into our system as well, so that we're really getting the best benefit from all the clouds that we can. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to do, and it's a neat technology and capability to build up within the company.
Thanks, Jenn, for sharing your experiences. So we have another question in Q&A. There's a question which says, for someone who's in the process of trying to transition into tech without any previous software engineering work experience, it's hard to get into a DevOps role. Any recommendations on how do you improve your chances of getting into DevOps?
Absolutely, yeah, that is a challenge. A lot of companies are somewhat old-fashioned in the way that they hire, and that they don't want to hire somebody in that has no experience, which quickly becomes a catch-22, because how do you get that experience? One of the things that we look for in people when we're hiring in, especially junior folks that don't have a lot of experience, is folks who have gotten hands-on. So if you're interested in DevOps, look at the technologies that are often used in DevOps across the industry. As an example, Jenkins, GitLab, GitHub Studios, the Code Star tools in AWS. Microsoft Azure has some really great automation tools that they have built into their cloud system as services. So look at those tools and pick some of them to go and really dive into on your own time and learn. Take the time to learn those and build a project with them. Even if it's a simple Hello World website that you build and push out there and make an automated pipeline to push it out and update your operational system. If you can show how you've implemented that and how you understand the real concepts behind what DevOps engineers typically do, that gets you a lot further than just about anything else will. The reality is there's not a lot of great programs out there from what I've seen yet to train up rookie DevOps engineers. So you kind of have to write your own path for it. The other thing that I will say that I always say when I get this type of question is there are really strong communities out there. Women Who Code is an example of one. There's other ones like Tech Study Slack. There's some really good Discord servers out there that you can go and join. with active communities of DevOps engineers and software engineers who are happy to help you learn and grow. Get yourself plugged into those communities, draw on the expertise that you find there, and listen and take advice from the folks that you talk to there, and use that to help guide where you study so that you can get a feel for what the industry is doing and where it's going. And that'll help you tailor your skills in a way that makes you much more interesting to recruiters and to hiring managers.
True, Jen, I agree. Having hands-on is always important to prove ourselves, that too in a junior position. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So we have a question regarding security. How do you deal with reviewing security around infrastructure and environments with the dev teams? Do you have some of them automated as part of the CI process?
We absolutely do. And we operate using a method called guardrail injection, which basically sets up limits and constraints on how people can configure their systems and actually get them to start up and go. So, we have automated protections in place to help prevent our engineers from checking in code into the operational system that are not secure. We also do automated security scans that use known industry standards for what a secure system looks like. And we'll scan for those and alert the developer that's trying to check in that code that they're breaking that industry standard. One of the things that we also do here that I'm really proud of is we train our engineers. We spend a lot of time helping them understand what it looks like to write a secure system and to write code for a secure system so that they know what the best practices are when they're writing. And that prevents a lot of errors from happening in the first place because they're aware from the outset that security is essential and has to be built in. We have a few different security scanning tools that we use, things like linting to make sure that you're using proper code standards. Things like Nessus and Nexus and SonarQube are some of the tools that we use that have, again, industry standards for what secure code looks like and what secure configurations look like. And you can actually, the cloud providers now have security scan tools that they provide as well that you can build into your pipelines. Things like Inspector and Config in AWS that will go and look at your system and tell you where your security vulnerabilities are up front. So we use all of those tools in different ways. A lot of those are automated and pushed out in our pipelines so that anytime a developer pushes infrastructure code, it gets tested for security configuration and validated before it gets pushed out into the baseline. And then we do have a security team that does a great job of manually verifying other changes or things that we know we don't quite have fully automated yet.
That's good to know, Jen. Thank you. So we have the next question as which software engineering skills transfer to a managerial role? What managerial skills do you not have and how do you learn them?
That's an excellent question. There is a lot of crossover between management and engineering. Oftentimes people look at the two and think they're very, very different, and in some ways they are. But some of the skills that cross over is the ability to look at a situation and logically analyze it and determine what the root cause is of the situation and how you can best address it. That skill set, that capability doesn't change whether you're analyzing software or analyzing people or organizational structures. Another one that transfers really well is time management. Most software engineers that I've spoken to, and from my experience as well, you're splitting time across multiple tasks, across multiple obligations, across multiple languages, and you have to be able to switch between those and manage your time and how you're spending the hours that you have at work to get as much accomplished as you can. You have to do that same thing with management. You're managing slightly different things. So I have to actively manage how I check my email or how often I check my email or when I schedule my meetings to make sure that I have productive time built into my day each day. So that's some of the stuff that transfers. Now, some of the things that I've had to learn are more of the project management side of things. So scheduling, costing, budgeting, planning out that side of things and learning how to properly report those. And then communications, I've had to really beef up my communications capabilities because you're speaking to a different audience when you're talking to management or leadership than you are when you're talking to software engineers. And you have to phrase things a little differently and essentially speak at a different level, right? With the engineers, you can get right down into technical and really dive in. With your higher level management chain, you oftentimes need to pick out the key nuggets that they need to know that gives them confidence that you know what you're doing and that you're managing the team well. But you don't want to give them all the details. So managing that communication and learning how to do that, along with that, building up the soft skills side of things, which again is communication. It's the interaction with people as, you know, as a manager or a leader of the people rather than as a peer necessarily. You know, those type of skills take a little bit of practice and you know, it takes time. But one of the tools that I found that's been most useful for that is finding a good mentor. So I enjoy mentoring people. I enjoy being a part of helping people grow in their careers, and I rely on my mentors. And I don't just have one, I have a few for different aspects of the work that I'm doing that help me with those different areas so that I can continually grow as well.
That's great, Jenn. It's always good to have different ideas from different people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
So we would like to also hear more about like how your teams are structured around app development and operations.
Okay. So my teams are primarily focused on app development, although I do have a few that are beginning to transition into operations now. The reality is we use agile methodology in the way that we run our programs. And because we use agile, most of our teams are built up of what I call T-shaped people, which are people who have a breadth of expertise or a breadth of knowledge across multiple different things. And then they have a few key areas where they're subject matter experts, where they've built up a depth of knowledge. And by having teams that are T-shaped or people on your teams that are T-shaped, you're able to split work across multiple different areas. And if a job needs to be done, you have more than one person that's capable of picking it up and doing it within your team. That allows us to make the transition into ops more easily than it would if we were much more focused and specialized on pure application development or pure test or pure security. And the reason that makes it easier is because one of the things all of my engineers on my teams are good at is troubleshooting and problem solving and, you know, figuring out how to resolve issues in their system. So when we move into an operational standpoint, that becomes more of the work that they're doing versus the development side of things, but it's still fulfilling work for them and they still enjoy it and they're familiar and comfortable with doing it because they've already been doing it all along. So, you know, the biggest thing that I've found from a management perspective as you do that transition is helping people set their expectations and making sure that they understand the changing priority between a development shop and an operational shop, because your focus is always on the customer and always on developing a product they're going to like and want to use. But once you're out in operations, you get more real feedback from your customers than you do when you're in development, just because they're actually using the system. And so it becomes a much more customer driven, you know, direct contact kind of environment, which from my experience, most of my team really enjoys as we make that transition.
That's good to know, Jenn. Thank you. So the next question which we have is, how do you balance family life, work, and continuing education from Victoria?
That's an excellent question. It's definitely a balancing act.
It's very easy to stretch yourself too thin while trying to balance these things. I find myself forgetting older skills as I learn something new. As a result, I think I end up with surface level knowledge only. What is the strategy which you use for learning and retaining information, like leading a busy life?
That is an excellent question, and time management and proper prioritization is something that I'm continually working on as well. The best that I can say is figure out a schedule that works for you and for your family and for your work. So as an example for myself, I'm typically up in the morning a couple hours before anybody else in my family is, because I'm a morning person. So that's a great time for me. And I spend that time in the morning doing things like developing my knowledge. So I'll dive in and do studying. This morning I was studying Kubernetes, working toward my CKA certification. And you know, so I spent an hour or so doing that this morning. And then I spent some time doing a workout. And then I spent some time, you know, reading the religious texts that I like to read. So however you want to do that type of stuff, spend time internally developing yourself and spend time externally developing your capabilities. The other thing that I do that helps and that I really have to work hard to make sure that I do consistently is when I leave work for the day, when I'm done with work, I'm done. I don't check my emails from work after I'm done for the day. I don't check my Slack channels. I don't check my phone for work things until I'm ready to go back to work in the morning. And that takes a lot of discipline, especially in today's remote work environment world, where we're always connected and we're always reachable. But that's the biggest thing that keeps me sane and keeps me able to balance everything, is keeping that separation and making myself do that. And then when I'm home with my family, I'm with my family. And, I'm a mom. I'm not a software engineer or a director at that point. So, it's setting your focus and helping yourself do that. The thing that I've found too is sometimes my mind will get spinning on a sticky problem I'm dealing with at work when I'm not at work. And the way that I've discovered that best helps me get rid of that and calm the mind down and not keep dwelling on it is I get out my work notebook and I just write down what I'm thinking about really quickly. It takes maybe 5-10 minutes typically. And just the act of getting out paper and writing it down and transferring it from my brain to the paper lets me release it so that I'm not worrying about it and thinking about it when I want to be focused on my family. So, little tricks like that, little tools like that to help me keep the division as clear as possible between work and home life. And then a regular schedule that I stick with every day, whether it's a work day or not, of getting up in the morning and spending that time studying and, and getting grounded for the day. Doing all of that works pretty well.
Great. Thank you, Jenn.
Yeah, that was really very inspiring to hear, like the amount of hard work you do. So I have this question that what interests you about your present job role or from the experiences you have had in your career?
So what interested me from my current job role, as I mentioned, it's the ability to influence culture and to really drive the culture of our organization and our company in a way that I want it to go. That's a fantastic thing to be able to do, and to have that influence within the company. The other thing that I love about the role that I'm in right now is I do a lot of what's called business development work, which is basically going out and finding additional work for our people and making sure that we've got fun projects coming in and fun, apps that we're developing and interesting work that people are going to want to come and do. That's a really satisfying part of the job that's very different from the technical work that I do, but it relies on my technical expertise to know what we can do, what's realistic, what would be a stretch, and to help estimate and predict that and go out and win that new work for us. So those are two big things I really like.
Great, sounds good, Jenn. So the next question which we have is common struggles that you had seen in the past with new employees in your organization.
So one of the biggest struggles that I've seen new employees, especially more junior level employees that are just coming out of undergraduate work, one of the biggest struggles I've seen them have is the shock of the difference between a real work environment and college environment. By the nature of the way that our college courses tend to be structured, they're very short in duration, so projects have to be scaled down and relatively small. And then you get out into the workplace where you have these huge projects that can be thousands of microservices and millions of lines of code across all of them, written in 5 different languages and deployed across 3 different clouds. And that's overwhelming. So, one of the big things that we try to do anytime we have somebody new come in, whether they're a junior person or a more senior person, is we assign them a buddy, basically, a co-pilot who helps walk them through the way that our company works, what our culture is, what tools we use and how to get everything set up, and gives them that a little bit more gentle introduction into the environment. And then I make sure that we have a continuing mentorship relationship that goes on for all of our new folks as they're coming in. And, if it's a technical person that's coming in, the initial mentorship that we establish for them is a technical mentorship. So it's somebody who's been doing that type of work for a while that can help answer their questions and, give them somebody to go and ask. And one of the things that we enforce very strongly within our org is that failure is a learning experience. It's not a bad thing. And that's something that a lot of people are really surprised when they get into our company and they're doing work. They're going to make a mistake. They're going to fail somewhere along the way. And a lot of organizations I found say that failure is not a problem and that it's a learning experience, and then they punish you when you fail. And we don't do that. We very strictly do not allow punishment for failure. We ask people to look at, what the failure was, why it occurred, and to assess and analyze how they could prevent it in the future. And we have, documentation that we ask them to write, basically, that says, here's my practices that I've gotten out of this and what I learned from this, so that nobody will hopefully have the same failure again. But building that culture of learning and of continual guidance and mentoring helps ease people. Now, not all companies have that type of a culture. That's the reality, that most of them don't, from my experience. But if you get into a job where you don't have that built into the company, again, the outreach communities that are out there, Women Who Code, Tech Study Slack, some of the other resources that are out there, you can get that same type of support from external sources if you need to. But the mentorship and the growth and the guidance and being able to ask your questions and know that you're not going to be treated like you know nothing because you're asking a question, those are essential. They're really, really important to help ease people into the industry.
Thank you, Jenn. I agree that failure is a step of success. So we learn something new and then make sure not to have them again in our life. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So Jenn, as you said that the students come from entirely a different culture. So how do you deal with the ones in your organization when they come up with a new strategy apart from the one which is already being used?
That is an excellent question. And one of the things that I try to encourage is that type of one of the things that we've done on one of our programs that I actually am really proud of is we have 3 sprints in an increment, but then we have a 4th period of time that we call our innovation sprint. And that's the time when we allow our engineers to pick something that they want to work on related to the program, but it might be something drastically different. Maybe we have a database that's a time series database that's backed by Prometheus, and maybe they want to try to bring in a different type of database for that, or they want to reach out and try a different tool or something like that. During the innovation sprint, they can propose that story and say, I want to try this, and we'll say, great, go for it. So it gives them a chance to build it out, try it, see how it works, let us compare it against the existing system. And then as part of the review process of that work that they're doing, as we come to the end of that sprint, we have the rest of the team look at what each other has done, and we talk about it as a team and decide what pieces we want to take forward and what pieces we maybe want to table for now. And if it just flat out didn't work, which does happen sometimes, then we learn from that as well. But that's one of the things that I really like, because that lets people be creative. It encourages them to be creative and to look for ways to try new innovations without just throwing something in and hoping it works, right? This technology, this industry, and all of the offerings that are out there change so fast that you can't just say no to new technologies and to new suggestions for ways of doing things. If you're not continuously looking forward, you're already falling behind. So, trying to build that system in to allow that innovation to happen and be supported with the way that we plan and schedule our development cycles makes a difference. And we pulled some pretty cool technologies into some of our services and offerings as a result.
Great. Thank you, Jenn. So the next question which we have is, did you suffer from any anxiety while re-entering after your break, and how did you overcome them if you did?
Oh, absolutely, I did. It was terrifying coming back into the industry. And really, I was lucky with the company that I'm working for, that they were willing to take a chance on me, because I'd been out of the industry for 7 years and software changes ridiculously fast. So I had a lot of anxiety coming in. I suffered from imposter syndrome big time, where I was convinced that I wasn't going to be able to do the job. But what I found was, if I turned that feeling of fear and anxiety into a drive to succeed and to prove that I can do the work, then I was able to be successful and I was able to launch myself forward in what I was doing. And what I mean by that was, when I found something that I couldn't remember how to do, or that I hadn't done in a long time that I had to learn, I would challenge myself and say, okay, I need to learn this. I need to know how to do this. I'm going to focus on this for 6 hours of my own time, or 6 hours at work if I had the ability to do that. Most of the time I didn't. Most of the time it was on my own time, but and I'm going to see how far I can get and how much knowledge I can build up. That way I can go on and be successful. So I used the anxiety, I used that concern as a motivating factor. And using it that way and acknowledging it, saying, yeah, I understand, I'm nervous, I'm missing some knowledge here. And accepting the fact that I had that missing knowledge made it so that I could then step forward and move forward and learn, rather than getting frozen by that anxiety. And it's worked out pretty well for me. I've had a pretty good career path since I came on with Parsons.
That's awesome, Jenn. So the next question which we have is, what are your thoughts on agile, scrum, waterfall? Does it depend on how good your developers are than on what your call is?
Well, you always want to have the best developers you could possibly have, right? I mean, that's a given. That said, I have worked under agile, under scrum, and under waterfall environments and programs. They are not the same thing. They are fundamentally different in a lot of ways. And I personally much prefer agile. I think it's a more flexible way of doing things for software in particular that lets you adapt more rapidly. Now, I will say, if agile is not managed properly, it just becomes chaos. And chaos of that sort is not a fun type of program to work on. So, organized agile, well-disciplined agile is important. And it's very, very valuable, because then you have shorter cycles. You can turn things out and test them and deliver them more rapidly, which gives you more opportunity for feedback from your end users, than what you get with a waterfall. The risk that I found with waterfall is that you're still trying to get the same amount of work done in a waterfall environment that you are in an agile environment, but you're not integrating as often. You tend to have a big integration event right toward the end of everything. And when you have a big program and with lots of different developer teams working on things, and you try to integrate that all together at the end, you find all sorts of missed communications and missed interfaces and, assumptions that were made that were incorrect, and they all blow up on you at the same time. And it doesn't really seem to matter that much how hard the software teams try to avoid those and how hard they try to communicate. When it's a long cycle like you get with waterfall, you always get caught off guard by something. I have rarely seen one where the integration just goes smoothly in a waterfall system. Whereas with agile, every 2 weeks or every week or every 3 weeks, whatever your cycle length is, you're merging all that stuff in and you're testing things against each other and comparing them and actually running them together. So you find problems much more quickly, and you find missed interfaces more quickly, so that then you can actively resolve those and work together to do it. So I have a strong preference for agile. When you're managing it properly and when you're keeping it organized properly, you can get by and do an okay job regardless of whether you have an all-star team of developers or not. We all want the all-star team, but you're not always going to have an all-star team. You might have a team of just good, solid developers. And when you're managing under any of the types or the life cycle styles, if you're managing it well, you can do a very successful program on a very successful program with solid developers. So, the better your developers are, the more you're going to get done, sure. And the higher quality it's probably going to be. But with a good process in place and good management of that process, you'll still produce a good result without all-star developers.
True, Jenn, makes sense. Agile is always about adapting new things, and it takes more time with waterfall. I agree. Thank you.
So moving forward to the next question we have. What are the biggest challenges that you have faced being a director?
That's an excellent question. Try to think how to answer that one. I think one of the biggest challenges that I faced personally in transitioning over to being a director from being an engineer is in how I count the value that I bring to my organization. When you're an engineer, especially in an agile environment, it's pretty easy to count your value. Oh, I got this many story points done this sprint. Fantastic. How does that compare to the last sprint? You know, did I get the same number of story points done? Did I get more? Did I get fewer? Why did I get fewer? You know, it's easy to analyze it with solid metrics that you can track. When you're a director in a management type of role, you don't typically have that solid of metrics that you can use, or the metrics look very different. You know, one of the metrics that I care about is the retention and recruiting side of things. Am I losing employees? Am I burning my people out? Am I pushing them too hard, you know, so that they decide they don't want to work for us anymore? Am I able to bring new people in and hire new people and grow my programs? Those are a little squishier on the metric side of things. So you have to look at the value you're bringing to the organization a little differently. They also have a longer turnaround time for most of those things than the software side does. So yeah, I think that's the biggest, most challenging thing for me has been figuring out how to assess the value that I'm bringing to the organization and making sure that in my mind, I'm bringing the same value or more value to the organization in my role as a director than I was in my role as a software engineer.
Great, thank you, Jenn. So the next question which we have is, it's overwhelming to keep up with tech. It's always something new happening. Is there any good resources that you relied on keeping in touch with the industry?
That is an excellent question. And you're right, it's absolutely overwhelming the pace of change in the industry. The thing that I've done, the tool that I've used is I pick a focus area or two that I find very interesting. You know, chaos engineering is one example. That's a technology and a technique and strategy that I find fascinating. So I signed up for a few chaos engineering, you know, mailing groups that are out there and a few chaos engineering communities. And I make a point to visit them once a week or so just to kind of check in and see what's going on. The other thing that I actually do that's been really valuable is I'll spend 30 minutes once a week or so scrolling through LinkedIn and seeing what articles have been posted out there for the different technologies that I'm interested in. So I'll, you know, look at the hashtag AWS posts on LinkedIn and just see what people are talking about and get an idea that way. The key thing is nobody's going to be able to know it all ever. There's always going to be somebody who's better at doing what you do or has a deeper knowledge than you do in pretty much anything that you're studying, and that's okay. It's not necessarily, you know, your job unless that's really what you want to do, and obviously somebody has to do that, but it's not necessarily your job to be the world's expert at any given technology. But building up enough depth of knowledge in technologies you care about and you're interested in, you know, that can be something that you can tackle. Choosing which ones to focus on, you know, that can be challenging. And I tend to let myself be driven a little bit by where I see my customers asking for things. So my customers right now are asking a lot for cloud agnostic type of capabilities to where you can deploy your software on AWS or Azure or on-prem or GCP or, you know, Alibaba or whatever. So I've been studying Terraform and I've been studying Kubernetes and containers because those are technologies that enable that. So, you know, I allow my focus to be driven by customer need because customer focus is important and helps you be successful with your company, especially in a director role. But then, you know, within that, tracking the industry is a matter of kind of scanning and finding a few good resources that you like that write in a way that you're interested to read their articles and just, you know, spending a little time each week kind of tracking that. Gives you a broad overview of what the industry is doing. You don't have to dive into everything, but it does give you an overview.
Great, thank you, Jenn.
So the next question we have is, during this ongoing pandemic situation, how are you trying to manage your teams remotely?
That's an excellent question. It's definitely a challenge. So I have a few teams that work on what are called air gap systems, where they're separated from the internet. So they have to actually go into a physical location to work. So for those teams, it's relatively easy because even during the pandemic, they've still had to go into their office to do the work. Most of my team is not in that situation and they've gone to working remotely. What I've done and what I've been working to do within our organization is we host, virtual meetups, virtual happy hours and that type of thing every once in a while, once a month or so, just to give people a chance to connect outside of work. And then I make a point to reach out to each person on my team at least once every couple of weeks and just have a one-on-one conversation with them so that they know they're still connected. And then for my managers, I've challenged them each to make sure that they're getting a one-on-one with their teams every week because they have a smaller set of folks to reach out to. So, it's a lot of one-on-one, very deliberate communication and contact in order to keep us knit together and tied together. And then we have some really good collaboration tools that we use pretty heavily for project work and just for general communications and camaraderie, within the workday. Tools like Slack and tools like, Zoom and tools like WebEx and those type of things allow us to feel like we're a little closer to each other, even when we're not. The trickiest part of it, the biggest challenge from what I've seen is making sure that the individuals on our teams that are a little more reserved and a little more quiet typically are not being forgotten or ignored or left out. So again, it's that deliberate outreach, that deliberate taking the time to have contact that's kept us knit together fairly well.
Great, thank you, Jenn. So we have next question from Victoria. She says second question is okay. It's absolutely okay, Victoria. So Jenn, you had mentioned earlier that constantly pulling in different technologies, it's easy to spin things up and end up with poorly designed implementation. How do you balance trying new things but doing it in a well-designed or well-thought-out way if your team is new to the tech?
That is an excellent question. And the way that we do that is, again, those innovation sprints that I mentioned. We build out essentially a proof of concept for the new technology during that innovation sprint, whatever they can get done in 2 weeks. Typically, if we like what we're seeing from what they've done, we don't instantly pull it into our system, but we'll write a story for the next sprint that begins that integration process or gives us a chance to try to pull it in and more tightly integrate it with what we have in our system currently. So again, it's the management side of things. It's the planning side of things, right? We know where we need to get to, and we know basically the steps we need to take to get there. And then each time we have a new technology that we're bringing in, we invest some time in assessing that to see if it's going to fit long-term where we're trying to go with our system. And we've had a few things that people brought in that looked super cool, but when we talked about it afterwards at our sprint retrospective, we decided as a team that that's really cool, but it doesn't really fit in with where we're trying to go. And so, maybe we table that knowledge and document it and say, hey, this is something we'll want to look at for in a future scenario, but it's not something we're going to pull in right now. So you're right that you can end up with poorly designed implementations if you're not providing a good framework to build those into your system. But we always assess our system for the architecture that we have and compare the new technologies with our end goals and make sure that they're a good fit before we make any actual moves to bring them in. But that's part of why that innovation sprint is so important and so essential, because it gives us that playground opportunity to try them out and just to be able to see what they look like and even begin to understand them. Some of the successes that we've had, as an example of integrating things into our system as a result of that, we had a database that we were trying to log all of our logs to, and we were quickly running into capacity issues, and it was Elasticsearch is the database that we had been using. And we were running into capacity issues. It was getting expensive. It was getting slow on the query responses and that type of thing. And so we had been talking for a while about, well, how are we going to improve this performance for this part of the system? Because that logging is essential for that particular program. And somebody suggested in one of the innovation sprints transferring, rather than using Elasticsearch, using Prometheus as our backend and providing an API that would then allow you to go and query Prometheus to pull out just the time that you needed and that type of thing. And so in one innovation sprint, they implemented the Prometheus database initially and showed how it could work and how it was just as performant and more performant than the Elasticsearch system that we had in place. And so we put it into our queue of things to start pulling into the system and really using. But the design that they had proposed, speaking of the architecture and making sure it's not poorly designed, the design that they had initially implemented was not a resilient design. It was a single Prometheus node running within our Kubernetes cluster. And so if we lost that container, we lost all that data, and that was not good. So one of the things we did was in the next innovation sprint actually was to build out a resilient Prometheus cluster so that we had, multiple Prometheus nodes running across multiple AZs within our cluster, so that if one of them failed, we didn't lose any data and we were able to continue processing and keep behaving. And we ultimately ended up pulling that resilient Prometheus cluster that we designed as a second, as a follow-on into our system, and it's performing better than our Elasticsearch cluster ever was. So, it's a well-designed, well-thought-out process. It's an incremental process, and we allow those innovations to take a little bit of time as we analyze them so that we can design an architecture that works and that fits in the system. And that's a learning process too. We got burned a few times early on where we tried to pull things in too quickly and it blew up on us. So that's kind of why we've grown the process we've grown.
Great, Jenn, thank you. To be honest, I did not realize the time also. It's almost close to 1 hour. So any other questions anybody has, you can put them in Q&A or chat. We still have 10 more minutes to go. Great, so we have another question from Padmaja. I'm trying to get back to work after a break of 4 years. Previously, I had 12 years experience in protocol testing, trying to break into deep learning, but it seems daunting. What will suit people like me to quickly get into a job and then work on out passion? Or should I stick with deep learning till I get a job in it? This is a personal question. Hope it is allowed. Yes, Padmaja, it is allowed.
Absolutely. And,
Yes.
I feel you on that challenge. I mean, my gap of 7 years was definitely difficult to try to get back into the industry afterwards. It can be really difficult. The biggest thing I can advise you is I would recommend looking to get into a job that's in an industry that has the capabilities you're looking for. Maybe not necessarily doing deep learning yet, but that, has aspects of it where it's doing that deep learning work. And you might be able to get a job in testing, doing work related to that. Once you get into that job, then you can, talk to your manager there, talk to your team there, and tell them, this is really where I want to go. How can we help me get there? And if it's a good company, they're going to say, great, you're interested in that. Let's help you work to get there. And if it's not a great company, they might say, that's not what we hired you for. And at least then you know that, and you can look for a different company to work for that'll help you. But the benefit of getting into a related field, into a related company, doing the work that you are experienced at doing, is it freshens up your resume. It gets you back into the real world. It exposes you again to all the things the companies are using, and it helps dust off that rust that you build up with that time off. The other thing that I would challenge you to do is build up that personal habit, if you haven't fully established it yet, of spending a little bit of time each day studying and building out. Pick a project that you want to do. There's some great tutorials out there for deep learning. Kaggle has some really good resources available that are free if you want to look there. But there's some really good resources out there that you can use to build up that knowledge and expertise and start building some projects. And using the different cloud providers, Google has a really strong machine learning and deep learning system in place, set of services that they provide that you can use pretty much for free, at least to a small degree. So get out there and try it, get out there and play with it, and build that skill set up, and put that in your resume too, that you're studying this and that you're working on this and building this project, on your own time to build your knowledge. Recruiters and companies will look at that, and if it's the type of company that's that you probably really want to work for, in my opinion, I'm biased, but if it's the type of company you really want to work for, they'll see that on your resume when you submit for a requisition for their company, and they'll say, hey, this person is actively improving themselves and working hard. They're the type of person we want to hire, and they'll help you, get into that type of position. So I would recommend, like I said, two things. Find a job that's in a related industry, maybe not necessarily doing the deep learning yet, but something related, and get that experience under your belt so that you've basically broken that gap of 4 years, and then establish your good habit of study and build and test and play with, and put that on your resume as well. And between those two, it might take a little while. It took me about 6 months to find a job, the job that I ended up in, when I started trying to look to get back into the industry to when I actually got back into the industry. So it can take some time, but don't give up. Don't let yourself get discouraged, and keep pushing forward and build those resources. Join up the communities online and build up your network, because your network can be really, really helpful in helping you land those positions too.
And then last question for today we have. You mentioned earlier about acquisition, and there might be different cloud services that were being utilized. Do you end up switching to one cloud service provider, or stick to the original cloud service provider?
We do both. Typically, as we're merging the companies that we've acquired into our system, we transition them over to using our corporate infrastructure that we've built out, and our corporate infrastructure is primarily on AWS. So as far as, for the work moving forward and continuing on, we'll transition them into using our corporate infrastructure on AWS. But if they have projects or products that they've created out there that run on Azure or that run on Google Cloud, we don't force them to move those products or projects. They're already established, they're already working, they're already using those. And, we understand that, and they get to keep using the cloud provider for that. So it's kind of a mix of the two. And it's all about the analysis and the cost and benefit evaluation of their environments and their systems and tools, which is just part of any acquisition process, right? There's always a conversion time period that has to happen to bring them into the company and to help them be integrated with us. But that is part of it that we consider. We don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. We don't try to ram everything into one cloud provider. We try to take the best practices and the best solution that we can for each situation. So it really is different depending on what company we're acquiring.
And we have another question, last question this time. Opportunities for a software engineer to grow without going into a managerial role.
That is an excellent question. That's going to be dependent in a lot of ways on the company that you're working for, what paths they have available. One of the things that we have available here that we're developing out and growing, we actually have two. We have a technical career path, and then we also have a SME path, or a fellows program, is what we call it. And essentially the SME program allows you to build recognized expertise at whatever technology you're really interested in, and to get recognition within the company as an expert in that field and in that area. And what that allows you to do is then, we advertise out our fellows and let everybody in the company know who they are and what their capabilities are. And then if you have a need on your program for an expert in that area, you can reach out to the fellow that's an expert in that area, or the fellows, and ask them for some of their time to help. So, that's one way that people stay technical within our company. And then the technical career path that we have is a more, if you don't want to be bouncing back and forth between different programs and giving assistance on an ad hoc kind of basis, you can build and develop your technical capabilities and essentially do a similar kind of thing, but with more focus on specific programs or projects or services or offerings that we have. So, maybe you want to follow a product that we're creating from birth all the way through to delivery and upgrade and ops. And so you choose to take the technical career path and build up that expertise on that specific product, and really become good at that. I personally prefer the SME route because it doesn't tie you to a product. So when that product reaches end of life, your job doesn't reach end of life, which is a risk with the other path. But they both work. They both are good ways of doing it. In the broader industry, the differentiators that you'll see are things like certifications and, you know, proving out your capabilities with getting certifications that not a lot of people have. So if you really like security, maybe you go the CISSP path and get, you know, Security Plus with CompTIA and the CISSP and all of those type of things to build that expertise and show that you're really good at that. It can get challenging as you have more years of experience under your belt to be able to stay purely technical, just because there's not as many roles out there for the highly experienced people as there are for the mid-level people. So a lot of times there's some transition that you have to do just kind of to stay in the industry into a leadership role where you become a tech lead or something like that, where you're leading a small team. Still lets you be mostly technical, but you know, you have to get a little bit of the leadership side too, typically. So there are opportunities. There are some niche things that you can find. It does become challenging the more senior you get to be able to stay purely technical.
Makes sense, Jenn. Thank you. We really appreciate your time, wisdom, and insights with your journey till now, Jenn. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We hope that all the questions got answered by Jenn and you all had a few takeaways. Do follow us on social, that is www.codecloud. And thank you everyone once again for joining this session today. We are hoping to see you in our next Women Who Code Clouds event, and have a fantastic day, everybody.